Hey, welcome to Optimize Your Body with Martin Silva, where we talk raw, uncut facts to truly help you optimize your body.
Hello and welcome to the Optimize Your Body podcast. I'm your host today, Andrew Bond. Myself and Martin are switching roles today. It's nice to have Martin in the hot seat and have him do the talking for a change. How are you doing there, Mart?
Good, thanks, Drew. Good. How are you doing, mate?
Very good. It's a nice, reasonable time for me in New York today. It's around 6 o'clock, so I'm 6 p.m. rather than 5 a.m., so I'm a happy man.
Time difference is a nightmare, isn't it?
Yes, sir. So for me personally, I wanted to have this podcast today. I wanted to have a more in-depth conversation about competition prep and you being a renowned professional fitness model, okay? You know, you've been posting a lot on Instagram lately in relation to doing your competition, Wbff pro competition in 3 weeks' time. So it would be nice for some of the listeners to get a more in-depth conversation on what goes behind that and kind of your past, right? So we want to talk about that as well. So I'm going to start with a nice, easy question, Mark. Okay, we'll go more in-depth later. Cool. When did you first get into the world of men's physique competitions?
So that was back in 2013. So what's that like? I don't know how long ago that is, 6 years ago. And it started out from just a few guys in the gym I was working at. They were like, you know, there's this new men's physique category now within the bodybuilding, within the IFBB, Bodybuilding Federation. And they said, you know what, you should give it a go because, you know, you've got that kind of physique where they're looking for, you know, the fitness model kind of men's health cover kind of look, you know what I mean? So I thought, you know what, I'm in shape pretty much all year round, although I wasn't, you know, I've been in good shape since I was, 18. I started lifting weights consistently from the age of 16. And even from the age of 18, you know, I was, fortunately, I've got good genetics, right? But I was very consistent from 16. So I was the guy in shape even at 18. So at this point, I'm like 25 and I'm in really good shape. And don't really know a great deal about nutrition. And, you know, I've got age on my side as well. So I thought, you know what? And I thought, I'll give it a go, right? So 4 weeks later, didn't really know much, like I said, about the diet inside of it. Just made a few changes, ate more egg whites. Didn't know anything. You know, I just followed some of the stuff Arnie was doing. Ate more egg whites, more chicken breasts. Didn't know what the hell I was doing. What's that?
Yeah, so, and with that, you know, you're saying about you were in shape from a young age. Do you feel that before you stepped on stage, do you feel that your physique was developed enough to be in that competition at that time? Or do you think it was quite premature?
Yeah, I think it was developed enough for the standards I was up against because, there was only 9 guys in my class. And I came second, right, on my first show. So I think for that particular show, my physique was developed enough, but I wasn't quite lean enough. If I'd have known more about the nutrition side of it and the calorie deficit, as we always talk about, then I could have dropped about another 4 or 5% body fat and potentially won the show. But I wasn't well versed enough in that arena.
Right, so take me through like that. The early days of stepping on stage, like how did your confidence differ back then to what it is now? Did you feel any fear or did it come natural to you going on stage in front of a packed house in Neath, right? It was?
Yeah, it was. And it was a packed house. And to be honest, that was out of the 5 IFBB shows I done with that federation, UKBFF. That was by far the best show. The atmosphere was electric in there, especially in the nighttime. But to answer your question, I was absolutely shitting myself. So getting on stage, to be honest, and performing is not something I've got much experience with. It's not something I've been very confident with. But I think, being a personal trainer and kind of the lifestyle I've had, I've got good people skills. I've been, a trainer since I was 19. So that really got me out of my shell in terms of my confidence. And also I think being I don't want to say an athlete, but playing sports from a young age, and we both played rugby from a young age, and that camaraderie of having that team spirit and stuff like that, it builds your confidence up, is what I'm trying to say, right? So playing sports and all that kind of stuff, and taking the knocks in rugby and all that kind of stuff, it does build your confidence up. And I had a big tribe of peoples around me, so I was a very confident guy. So getting on stage was something new to me. So it was very challenging, and I was crapping myself. I'm not going to lie, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and you obviously came second in that competition. You were fortunate to get to the British finals, right? So from advancing from that first competition to that final, what was the biggest difference you could see in physiques of the other competitors?
Oh, yeah.
Go on, sorry.
No, go on. Finish.
I was just going to say, and then even from that to advance into obviously a different competition, but advancing from that to the pro level as well. Let's take me through the two differences there.
Yeah, cool. So going from that show, obviously you kind of supported me, and obviously you competed yourself as well, right? So the second show I did, the British Finals, I come second in that show, as I mentioned then. The first show I did, sorry, for the listeners, I came second. And then 5 weeks later, this wasn't planned, but I qualified for the British Finals. So I thought, you know what? I got the itch for it, and I just went for it. And that really is when things kind of went downhill, but also made me who I am and made me the person I am now on this podcast, talking and having the knowledge I have, really, because I've had to really apply myself as a result of building up an extremely unhealthy relationship with food and developing a binge eating disorder. So that 5 weeks, right, before I go into the standards of the athletes, that 5 weeks between the first show and the second show I did is when I started really restricting foods. You know, I had an old school bodybuilder give me a plan. I'm not going to mention his name. You know who he is. He's from your ends in Wales, from the valleys.
Yes, sir.
And he just, he was just an old school bodybuilder. Didn't really teach me anything. He just said, right, eat this. Turns out, when I look back, I was probably consuming around about 1,500 calories a day, maybe a little tiny bit more. And my output was through the roof. So it was it was way too big a calorie deficit. You know, the maximum deficit you should have really going into a show is like 20%, maybe 25% tops. This was like a 40% deficit, right? So for the listeners, let's just say my to maintain my weight, right, I would need about 3,000 calories. I was having around about 1,700 calories probably. And I felt like shit. And I was eating the same foods every single day, which is not necessary, following a black and white diet plan. And I got absolutely shredded. And that, on the plus side, and that's when I actually discovered that I had a 10-pack, which was bizarre. Let me just talk about that quickly. I've never really spoke about this or thought about it really, but I went from like having a 6-pack to completely different shaped abs, right? And 10 of them in the space of about 3 weeks. It was really weird. I was like, I must have dropped about 6-7% body fat within that 5 weeks. Probably more, actually, probably about 8-9%. And it just peeled off the layers of body fat. And I realized that actually if I flex my abs in a different way, so I kind of blow out rather than tensing and bracing like we talked about the other day, just kind of blowing out and stretching my abs out a little bit more. I actually had 10 abs, which was crazy, right? That was a crazy experience. But then I was just restricting my food. And then, as you know, I did the show and I was a little bit naive because I didn't realize how much steroids were floating about in that category, because obviously it was supposed to be the kind of healthier category where it was like a healthy fitness, men's health kind of look. But when I turned up that day and I was backstage, I was like, Jesus Christ. Some of the guys were just massive, full. And I was just like, okay, I've been a bit naive here. And the standards were, to answer your question, the standards were much, much higher. And then after the show, as you know, and you were there supporting me, that was the biggest binge to this day I've ever had. I think we mentioned it before. Awful. Talk them through it, Drew, quickly.
I was due to do a competition myself, so I'd kind of done one probably 2 to 3 weeks before, right? Or maybe a little longer, maybe a month before. And I was due to do another one probably a couple of weeks after the British Finals. And I felt, obviously I'm slightly biased, but I felt Martin should have done better in that show. And a few other people were saying the same thing. So when Martin didn't win the show or come in top 3, I was like, right, bugger this. I'm not going to do the show myself. Threw down my chicken and rice, which I was eating at the time, chicken and brown rice, and just scooped out a load of. You had a big tub of probably like a kilo of almond peanut butter, right?
That's right. But the first stop was the big cupcakes. Remember those giant cupcakes? And you would do. Remember with the ice in? With the ice in, and you go.
Yeah, mate, it was devastating, and we went from rice cakes with peanut butter to cupcakes to what's TGI Fridays?
TGI Fridays.
Binge there. We had milkshake afterwards.
We had a starters and mains, we had a dessert, and we had an Oreo shake. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it vividly because then we went back to the hotel. Granola.
Back to the hotel, right? Chocolates. Full breakfast the next day. I think we had a full breakfast.
Okay, it was more than a full breakfast. We're looking at like 4,000 calories, right? This is like everything you can think of, right? And then in the car, all the way home, we were just eating chocolate. Oh, mate.
And we went to Just Brazil, right?
Viva Brazil, yeah.
Viva Brazil. We ate every meat on the
buffet.
On the menu, besides one meat. Had the buffet, salad buffet, potatoes. Then we went out, drank. Then we came back to your place and we had a large Domino's each and a tub of Ben & Jerry's to polish it off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you continued after that.
I continued the next day. Yeah, I went on for about a week.
Justifiable because you were shredded to the bone. I wasn't. So for me, it was probably good to stop there, right?
Remember, I was a mess. Can you remember this as well? Remember, I had that cut. I burned my mate. Andrew turned up at my house a few days before this show, guys, right? And I had a cup. Just being stupid, clumsy as I am, right? I had this flask, and I didn't do the flask up properly, right? I had hot coffee in there, poured it all over my face, bloody burnt all my chin. So I had this. Just to top it off, I've been binging. I was obviously on a downer from not placing.
I think this was before that was before you got on stage. Remember, you had a
I had to get all makeup put on it. In
terms of confidence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about
scab. Anyway, go on.
Let's talk about the concept of you being a natural athlete, right? You mentioned steroids earlier, right? As, performing at the pro level is completely unheard of, or you'd think, being a natural athlete, right? So I know you're a huge advocate of demonstrating to followers they can build a fantastic physique without using any aids or anything like that. What's been your main motivation to stay natural, knowing that taking something might give you that extra edge over the competition?
First of all, I'm not going to lie. I have been tempted several times, right? Absolutely. And you probably have been anyway, right? Just as we've talked about before, just being driven by insecurities. We were both skinny kids growing up, skinny teenagers. You want to look good. You want to be in good shape. And a lot of people where we're from take steroids, right? It's the norm pretty much, right? So
it's readily available.
Readily available. And you're always tempted. You've always got that devil on your shoulder, right? But I never did it because I was, like I said, because I was so consistent. I guess because I'm quite lucky in a sense. I'm not going to lie. Obviously, the hard work, consistency, and all that kind of stuff is number one. But, genetics do load the gun, right? But it's that hard work which kind of pulls the trigger. But I've been fortunate enough to have those genetics where I started training at like 14, got really consistent from 16, where your testosterone level, you're basically on natural steroids, right? Under that age. It's like natural steroids, right? Your testosterone levels are through the roof. It's like Mount Everest of tissues in your room because you're just... Because, you won't go into that. But,
I think people know what that means anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
If they have kids, they've experienced it themselves, don't they?
Exactly. So, just to talk about that, I was consistent. I was in good shape. And then I decided to myself, I don't need to, really. I just kept fighting it off. And then... But by the time I'd done that first show, I was in great shape, I went traveling for like 5 months, lost a bit of shape, but obviously I lost quite a bit of my shape, but I got it back really fast. And that's when when I was 22 and I got back from traveling, 23 actually, I just responded really well. And that's when I felt like, wow, it looks like I actually am on steroids now. So again, in your early 20s, your testosterone levels are still high. You've still got the age on your side. And because I was in such good shape, I just didn't feel as much of an urge as other people to do it. And I think as I got older, I got a bit more secure. I was still insecure in my early 20s, but in my teenage years, I was much more fragile, and I was much more tempted in my late teens to do gear because I was basically more insecure. I still, in my head, I was still a really skinny teenager. So when I looked in the mirror, I still had that dysmorphia where I would see a skinny kid looking back at me. Once I got through that barrier and into the next chapter, it was a lot more smooth sailing then.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I asked you earlier, did you feel your physique was fully developed enough to step on stage? Because I know that there are people out there listening to this who are tempted by steroids, right? But they haven't given themselves enough opportunity to build their best physique, right, without using anything. They haven't programmed efficiently for themselves. They haven't dialed their nutrition in. They haven't trained effectively. And they're already looking to take or are taking steroids. But I feel like, that should be a last resort for you. If you've tried your best and you've pulled out all the stops to build your best physique, and you feel you're still not where you want to be, then maybe that's when you might want to use them or not, But that's kind of the way I alluded to that question earlier, mate,
Exactly, yeah. And that's the thing, just to clarify what you said then, you said, you might want to use them. There's nothing wrong with saying that because, we're not against people who take steroids. We're not against them at all. Like, we have nothing, like, we're not trying to be on our high horse here, but what we're saying is, take care of the big rocks first, because the most important thing is, Andrew mentioned all those big rocks then, training properly, being consistent, eating right. Sleep is the foundation. People don't prioritize sleep. And when you talk to people about this, it's not sexy, and it's not a fast overnight, or 1 week results like you would get from taking steroids. And that's the thing for anyone listening to this, especially guys, right, who are tempted to take gear or are taking gear. You really need to just stop chasing the fast, do it the right way and not the fast way, as we always say, right?
Exactly, man. And let's discuss money, Matt. Everyone wants to know about money these days, right? Money. So you're a pro fitness model, right? So you should be raking money in from.
I'm a millionaire. Yeah, I haven't told the listeners that.
It's that easy?
Yeah, made millions.
So when you turned pro, like the checks just didn't bounce.
So my bank, honest to God, I was a millionaire in the space of, I couldn't believe it. Nah. In reality, you don't get paid shit. So it's the only sport, bodybuilding, for the listeners, that it's the only professional sport as well where you don't get paid directly, really, unless you're at the top level and you're Mr. Olympia level and you're winning Mr. Olympias. Even guys who compete at that level, right? They get a lot of money from sponsors and supplement companies, and they create their own clothing brands. But a lot of the money they make is off their own back. And it's the same thing as me, really, right? So we don't, just for the listeners, just to clarify this now, because people do scratch their heads and they're like, "Why? I don't understand why they do it." Because another thing is, the problem is with the competition world is when you look online, and I've noticed this more and more, people kind of whinge a bit too much about it, right? So there's this extreme, right? So you get people are like, "Oh, I'm really happy all the time, and I love competing, and it's just all sunshine and rainbows." And then you've got the other people then who are just whinging about all the time, right? And just like, it's all such a grind, and like, so
in the trenches and this and that.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, I'm going to post some stuff now because we'll talk about this, but I did struggle a lot last week. But, it's about doing it for the love of it, right? And also having a bit of a game plan. So for me, when I switched federations, just to quickly go over the last question, when I after 5 shows with the IFBB, I switched over to Wbff. And then this is the federation I compete with now. The first show I did with them, I came second, just missed out on my pro card. The next show I did, I came first out of like 40 at the European Championships, got my pro card. But the pro card is just literally a certificate, right? And it's a status. So, you're into that pro division. You don't get paid shit, right? Just to clear that. But my goal was then is like, right, now I want to kind of push the online stuff. I want to get more traction online. I want to get more attention and eventually build an online business of my own, through online coaching and selling the programs and whatnot, which is where we're at now. So it was all kind of part of my plan to actually eventually, get some financial gain out of it. But it didn't work out as I wanted it to, and it wasn't like, I was, once again, very naive when it comes to business, very, not experienced really when it comes to building an online business. And in my head, I was like, right, I'm going to get this pro card now. Then I'm going to, I'm going to get all these opportunities. Like, people are going to be banging my door, modeling contracts. It doesn't work like that, right? So for the most part, people, if you see people online and they're sponsored by supplement companies and they're doing competitions and it looks like they're making a lot of money, some of them might make out they're making a lot of money as well, and that's not to hate on people, but some people do make out, you'll see them next to a Ferrari, which a lot of the time they've rented out. You know what I mean? So just bear that in mind. For the most part, no one's making any money out of this.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched upon supplement companies as well there. So let's delve a little bit deeper as well into your relationship with food, right? You mentioned both of us, we've had binge eating disorder and orthorexia, things like that. But let's your relationship with food in the early days of your career, right? At that time, were you aware of any of the issues you had with food, or was it just normal for you?
Yeah, I wasn't really aware. That's a great question, actually, because I wasn't really aware until I guess when I look back, I just didn't used to eat generally growing up. We've said this before, but I didn't really eat like healthy foods. Most of the food I ate growing up as a kid was processed. But then when I did my first show, leading up to that, I'd actually built up a better relationship with food. So I was actually just tuned in more to eating salmon, chicken, lots of vegetables, and less, like virtually eliminated gluten at this point, because I just realized I felt a bit better. And also dairy as well. I realized I felt a bit better. But that's about all I knew, really. That's about kind of the level I got to. Was like, I feel better when I don't have gluten and dairy, and I also feel better when I eat more vegetables. But back then, I wasn't really thinking about that. I was just doing it. I wasn't aware, to answer your question. But then, like I said, it took a turn for the worse in between those two shows. So the first show, all good. Leading up to that second show, restricting calories, eating the same food every day, chicken and asparagus and some walnuts, whatever I was eating. And then we had that massive binge. And obviously you kind of nipped it in the bud. And when you went off on your own, wherever you went, then back to, I think you were living in Australia.
I escaped.
Yeah, that's why you escaped.
To Australia. Mate, I had to go on the other side of the world.
And then basically, mate, for that whole week I was binging. And I remember getting to the Friday, mate, and I was doing some chest press on the machine, mate, and I had a dizzy spell and almost passed out. That's how bad I pushed my body with the binge eating. And that's when I realized I had a bit of a problem, you know. But even
go on, sorry.
No, go on.
You showed a picture the other day on Instagram, and it was full of, you know, heavily processed foods, right? You used to make lists of foods that you wanted after shows and restaurants you wanted to eat at, and
definitely
tell me about that. You know,
that's exactly right. That's what happened next. Then, so that's when I realized. Then, leading up to, I think the next time I competed was the following year, and I was making a list once again, just like I was the time before. I was obsessing about food. I would lie in bed at nights thinking about all these different restaurants, Ben and Jerry's. Honestly, basically like a fat person, like, you know, no disrespect, but like a fat man in my body, like literally trying to climb out and, you know, get a better of me. And I would make lists and I would obsess. And then when it got to the two, I done two shows back to back. After that, once again, then a massive binge. But even in like the year in between those shows, that's when I really had the worst relationship with food, and it really started escalating because I was Monday to Thursday, I would basically struggle. I thought in my head, right, if I eat just my chicken and veg and my meat and vegetables mainly in the week, then I can eat what I want on the weekend. And that was genuinely what I was thinking. I was thinking, this is quite healthy. It's fine because you're eating clean in the week, like a lot of people think now. But it really doesn't work like that. It's not like that, is it? And
no, and I think that can be related to most people that we work with. The weeks are fine. They're restrictive, and then they don't realize how much damage they actually do on the weekend. You know, they're in a calorie deficit during the week. You know, everything's going swimmingly, and then on the weekends they party, and then that leads to overeating, and then they outdo all that hard work they've done during the week on the weekends in 1 day or 2 days. And I think we need to realize it takes time to build up a healthier relationship with food, right, Mark? It's been a long process for you. You were going through these type of eating disorders, and now you're in a much better place. Definitely. Let's talk about how was your mental state during that time? How were you feeling, psychologically? Were you going through anxiety, depression, or anything like that? Or did you just feel...
Do you know what? I wasn't actually going through depression, anxiety at the time, thankfully. Yeah. But I was, I kind of was really. Like, come Monday and Tuesday, this is kind of how bad it was. I would have like a food hangover for like 2 days. Yeah. I'd have a hangover on the Monday. I'd just feel rough on the Monday, like just mental clarity, bloated. Tuesday, you know what it's like. If you have a binge on the weekend, you could be holding water for like up to 3-4 days. And I'd just be bloated to like the Tuesday, Wednesday. And by the time I'd actually got to a Thursday or Friday, I'd be cracking again, right? So this is very extreme for the listeners. And I think a lot of guys don't really talk about this as much, right? But I just wanted to flip this round to you as well, Anne, because we can both identify with this, right? Because you've been in a similar place, right?
Oh, of course, mate. Yeah, I was probably pretty much the same as you. I think we kind of egged each other on when it came to the weekends, right? We had some serious binges then. At the time, I didn't really recognize it. I just felt like it was the norm to do, right? I felt that I was good in the week, then came to the weekends, maybe a Sunday, then I'd have a quote-unquote cheat meal. But unfortunately, it wasn't just one meal I would have. I couldn't just see it as a burger and fries, a just normal meal, and just move on with my life. I felt that because I was so restrictive during the week, I then had to eat as much as I could during the weekend because I knew that for those next 5 days, I wasn't going to eat those bad foods again. So it was just a vicious cycle, really. Well, that would happen. I was actually a lot worse before that period. I probably would go 3 to 4 months without eating any what I deemed at the time as bad food. So I would just be so strict for like 3 to 4 months. I wouldn't allow myself to socialize with other people. If family were having a meal, I would just sit there and not eat. This is looking back, it's ridiculous thinking about it and how that affected relationships with those around you, which we'll delve on later when it comes to competition prep with you. It just causes kind of tension and stress and arguments. Really, if I had known what I know now at that point, I would have I'm in much better physical shape now and mental shape, if you can call it that, from where I am now with my relationship to food than when I was then. I felt that I was doing the right thing by not eating those foods. I felt, hey, I'm better than everyone else. I can restrict myself, and I know better than everyone else. But really, it was very unhealthy for me to go through that process and not build up relationships with those around me. So it was I would literally think, right, I'm going to go. Even when I was away, like you saw me when I was away in Vegas with you, and I was eating pretty much healthy all that week, and then when I go home, then I would have a little binge.
And when you say healthy, though, right, it's not necessarily healthy.
It wasn't healthy.
Don't get me wrong.
Looking back, it wasn't, but at the time, I felt it was.
Exactly. You were eating, for example, I can remember we went to McDonald's, right? We were going to McDonald's and stuff, and like I said, I've always grew up eating processed foods, right? I've never really. It was only when I really started. It was just to verify this now. Leading up to that first show, right? That is when I'd started connecting to, it's only now I've realized that I started eating healthier leading up to that show, but that wasn't planned for the show. I guess it was a bit of a coincidence. But leading up to about 25, my diet was terrible. But it's interesting because your journey is a little bit longer, like more prolonged than mine, right? Because you were doing it for quite some time, right? But yeah, I remember we were at McDonald's and we're all stuffing burgers and whatnot, and Andrew's there with his nuts and oats, right? I don't even think you would have. Yeah, you did. You had oats. Yeah, in McDonald's. That goes to show how extreme and obsessive you were, right? And what was the reason behind that? And it was to keep your abs looking sharp, right?
Yeah, I guess just wanted to look good on the beach, man. That was it. That's all it boiled down to.
You were shredded in Vegas, man. But how did you feel mentally? Now. How did you just try and think about it?
I felt great in Vegas because I was drunk all the time. But I certainly during that time, that whole period, there was certainly bouts of depression, most definitely, mate. Probably for that reason, it could have been work related, but it probably was. A lot of it was linked to overtraining, being monotonous with it, and definitely during that time period, there must have been a correlation between the food I ate, not socializing as much as I should have with friends and family during that time because of that. I'd miss out on social occasions. That means you're not talking to as many people, and that just builds up sadness, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. But that's the thing. That's what's interesting though with you is because you went extreme because you weren't even competing really at these times, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the hardest thing about it. Looking back now, I had no particular goal in mind other than I was playing rugby, but. I was turning up to rugby as I was very fit. Like I was one of the fittest people there, I would say. But I wasn't preparing for a competition. I wasn't preparing for, as I am now, a photo shoot or anything like that. I had no reason to sit out on certain occasions or not eat during certain occasions because I had, like you have now, like a competition coming up. It was just psychological. I just felt that I shouldn't eat certain foods.
And it's time you never get back, right? And you don't realize that at the time. You never get that time back. That's one thing, even money, talking about money, you can grind hard making as much money as you want, but you just always got to, this is just kind of like a comparison, always got to remember the time you never get back, right? Time is the enemy, right, in a way. So what's it called? I was just going to say then, I was the same. But it was when I was competing, right? So I would be, this is the thing, it would almost be extremes. I would be, actually, no, come to think of it, right? Even when I wasn't competing in between shows, when I had this really bad binge eating disorder, I would actually stay in on weekends. I would stay in with my girlfriend at the time, and it's weird, I'm just having an epiphany now. I would stay in on the weekends rather than going out and drinking with my mates, which in reality, it wasn't like it was benders. It was just a few drinks, casual social mates. And I was like, I want more of that euphoric feeling, really, from eating foods like Domino's and Ben & Jerry's and watching Netflix because I've restricted my foods all week. So come to think of it, it wasn't just leading up to shows. For those whole 2 years where I was competing on and off, I was sacrificing relationships and time on the weekends just so I could kind of, worked hard in the week, relax on the weekend. That was my justification, from work. But really, when you're pumping loads of shit food into your body all weekend, is that really relaxing and nourishing your body? It's not, is it? And you're not socializing. And we didn't connect the relationship side to it, did we, back then, to health? You know what I mean? So yeah,
exactly. As overall health, right? We only saw how we looked, and that was it. And let's talk about your relationships with people around you when you're doing prep. Like, do they suffer a lot because you are so fixated on that end goal? Are you, are you angrier? Are you arguing more? Are you more tired? Do you have less time for people? Obviously, you can't go out and eat as often as you would like to, right? You have to prepare all your meals. How does that affect your relationship with those around you?
Do you know what? For example, yesterday I met up with two of my mates over this local pub, and it was just because I haven't saw them for a while, and I was really dying to just cancel it. I was like, why did I agree to this? You know what it's like when you're prepping for a comp, you're like, I got this energy, right? Obviously, PTing some clients as well in the morning. I'd already been speaking to people, training, and you're trying to, but because of what we know now about the relationships and the interactions and how important it is, especially because I live out in Australia and these two boys are from Wales, mates I've known for a long time. I was like, no, I'm going to make it a priority. So I turned up, met them. My one mate ate a pizza, right? And most of this is probably thinking, oh, that must have been tough. It really isn't now. Because of the journey we've been on now, I no longer crave those foods. So those processed foods, I still have a bit of addiction to. Don't get me wrong. There's trigger foods, which I won't keep in the house. You know what I mean? Like, I won't have those foods in the house because I still have the addiction. But if someone's eating a pizza in front of me, if that was me competing, say 2-3 years ago, I would be angry. I'd be sitting there and I'd be like, how could you? And I'd be taking out on them. In my head, I'd be like, how the fuck can you eat a pizza in front of me? You know what I mean? But it was totally fine, mate. I was like, I wasn't even tempted. And I'm so glad I sat there for like 2-3 hours and I felt great, mate. I felt totally fine. And like this time round, other than last week, which I'll quickly skim over, last week was tough. Unfortunately for my girlfriend, she sees the worst of me. So it's like you come home, live in a 1-bedroom apartment, and you just want to be kind of on your own, and you don't want to speak to anyone. And like she would just ask me how my day was, and I'd be like, oh, like even that was irritated me last week. So that becomes
more prevalent when you're dialing down to those single-digit body fat figures, right?
Yep.
Close to prep, so that's going to get a little bit harder. But I think you're probably in a different place now because you are allowing different foods into your diet that you probably wouldn't normally have.
Yes.
When you prep before, I'm just imagining, or I know what you ate before was just plain chicken, broccoli, and white potato.
Definitely, mate.
Asparagus. You know what I mean? So at least you have more variety now. And I know that you're saying that. Let's talk about your health as well, because I know your health during this process has probably been affected a little bit when you're focusing on aesthetics. How is that, how is that different from previous competitions, but also how is that affected during this process?
Yeah, so the 4 pillars of health, right? Let's run through them. Sleep. My sleep has suffered. Last week, my sleep suffered a bit because I was trying to do too much. I was still trying to keep on top of the social media stuff and all the rest of it, and I wasn't making my sleep a priority. So I was going to sleep a little bit too late, and then I had 2 really nights bad sleep because I wasn't like winding down before bed, and I felt like crap. And then that was a knock-on effect then. And then if we talk about, the relationship side of it, I was being miserable and short fused with my girlfriend. I was not really wanting to speak to people as I'm normally quite outgoing. I didn't really want to speak to people and communicate with many people around me. And then if I talk about the nutrition side of it, I mean, that was totally fine, but I'd cut back on calories. So that kind of, I wanted to cut back and get kind of ahead of schedule because my weight loss and fat loss has slowed down for a week or two. So I must have been kind of underreporting my calories a little bit. There was something going on there. And just for the audience, right? When people say, inflammation and like, I'm holding water and, I've got this hormonal issue. Most of the time, 95% of the time, people are underreporting calories. So you're eating too much, right? As simple as that. And that's what was happening with me, mate, because I was putting it down. It's like, and you put it down to, water retention. Then 2 weeks later, you're like, you're still the same weight. You got to do something here. Do you know what I mean? So I ramped it up for a week, but I think I went up a little bit too much. And that's where the psychological side got the better of me. And so I went harder than I needed to. It was probably unnecessary in terms of how much I cut back. And now I'm ahead of schedule. But my health, all in all, took a big hit because I felt like shit. And I mentioned all those things then. Relationships, sleep took a hit. And then as a result of that, then by the end of the week, I just felt awful by Saturday. The worst I've felt, man. Like my libido as well. That's one thing I'm really tuned into now. Normally, you know, I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'm decent. I got a sex drive, right? Nothing,
decent,
right?
Decent in the sack, is it, man?
I'm decent in the sack, mate. You know, I mean, I'm not going to
blow your own trumpet, literally.
Exactly, mate. Well, I'm not going to say anything, but you know how it is, Drew. But no, come Saturday, my libido is absolutely dead. Normally there's something there, right? It is something there. Like in the week, I still feel a bit dead. So my testosterone levels must have just, because of the lack of sleep and all the rest of it, dropped right down. And I tell you what was mad, Drew, is on the weekend then, I got to Sunday and I hit maintenance calories. So I had a boost. I had loads of cholesterol, you know, the animal, the chicken liver and lamb hearts I was eating. I tell you what,
people
mate,
love that, I'm sure, listening to this.
I know, love it.
It's a acquired, is that the right word? Sorry. Acquired taste?
Yeah, it is.
It's a funny old taste, that, right? I don't mind the lamb liver. I like that. The chicken liver is a step too far for me, mate. I don't mind the first bite, but as you chew, it just, I don't know, it just puts me off a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm right by the fridge here now. Look, just for the listeners, it's a lamb liver there. Look.
Wonderful. There you go. What else you got down there, man?
I got all sorts. I got a sheep's arm at the bottom. I got a goat's leg there.
Pig's hoof.
I got a guy's head in the chiller. I got it all going on there.
Whatever it takes to win, right?
Exactly. That's it. You
were talking about earlier. You obviously you thought that your calories are too high during that brief period. Let's talk to this about clients as well, because if they see a slight change on the scale, they may do what you did in that situation and kind of panic a little bit and then just change everything drastically, right?
Mm.
That's not the correct thing to do. Is sometimes you just need to be consistent with it and things will change eventually. Obviously, it's different for you now. You're going into contest prep. But for the average listener who is just looking to get in shape or lose weight, sometimes it's best not to panic and just throw everything but the kitchen sink at it.
Definitely, man. That just reminded me, you typed up a great blog on this, so we need to add that to the website on the weigh-in scales. But yeah, like to anyone listening, the scales, even now, knowing what I know, they can still get a better view if you obsess on the scales. So the most important thing to mark progress is really to focus on the health markers, right? And performance as well. I think that's a big one. When you focus on just journaling your workouts, if you can, if you really focus on when you're in the gym, maximizing, being productive, not going on your phone in between sets, getting in the zone, making a note of the weights you're lifting, and really trying to progress in the gym, it switches your mindset then to focusing so much on aesthetics, right? But when most of us do want to look better, right? So when it comes to focusing on the aesthetics, right, to get results, take pictures. I reckon every 4 weeks. Don't take them every week. Take a picture and watch what happens if you focus on your performance in the gym. You focus on eating right most of the time. You take another picture in 4 weeks' time. You do ideally a full body training regime for about 4 weeks, and boom, watch what will happen, right? Just, it's quite simple, but the weigh-in scales, I think, can be a poor marker in a lot of ways. And I mean, they do have their place, but what do you think?
And people can be quite meticulous with that, right? They'll weigh themselves every morning, but we know that can be altered by sodium levels. Have you eaten out the night before?
Yep.
Your water intake? Have you been to the toilet? There's so many little markers that will change and vary that for you. Definitely. And let's talk about, obviously, people being meticulous with the weigh-in. How about issues such as orthorexia, right? And you now, it's different for you now because you're going into a competition and you're weighing everything to the gram. But what about your average person who is is stuck in this paradigm where they just weigh everything to the gram and they, everything is written down and they have to be perfect? Like, how is that?
Exactly, yeah. And that's the extreme version, right? Is weighing everything to the gram, all of your food. And that's very common where people get really I understand, like, it does have its place as well. I wanted to put that out there. I do get some of my clients to weigh their food, some of them. But you have to, like Andrew and I have been training people for a long time, and you have to really adapt to the person. Most people, I think, weigh weighing their food, not really necessary. Some people, people who kind of are just a bit more sloppy with things, and they're not really, it can be handy at the start at least to like weigh their food. But the thing is with the fitness industry is always extremes. So you see this a lot now, is where you'll look at people, again, using social media as an example. You'll look on social media and you'll see people who look really fit and healthy and they're in great shape all year round, but something has to give. And a lot of these people do get obsessive. So they have to, cardio is a big one, right? They have to do cardio, especially people who've competed and they've had like, online coaches, and they haven't really learned much themselves because they've always had coaches, and they'll do cardio all year round, and that is their regime. So they're spending, let's just say half hour a day doing cardio, right? Now, over the space of the week, that's 3.5 hours a week, which in reality, it's not necessary to stay in shape, but they have to do it because it's kind of the orthorexia thing, right? Kicking in there. Do you see what I mean? As an example?
Yeah. So and let's talk about, you obviously have a lot of experience working with clients, right? You've had some clients on your roster, from people looking to lose weight to someone who wants to be more athletic to
for a show as well.
Training for competitions, right?
Yep.
So what's the difference between training clients for competition and your average clients?
Yeah. Generally, based on my experience, it is a lot easier prepping some for a comp, generally. But this can swing the other way. It's extreme, right?
I know you've had experience in the past where it swung the other way. You've been talking to me about it with certain people who are,
That's right. Remember I was talking to you about that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man, that was a ball ache. Like, so you've got to kind of select nowadays, obviously, and both of us, we kind of select a bit more who we want to take on because it can become a lot more stressful, a lot more, it can do more harm to us than good when you're coaching someone like that, because they have issues which you need to pick up on right off the bat, right? Like, behavioral issues with food and, just mental issues, right? Which you need to be aware of. So I've had a bad example of someone I prepared for a comp before. Oh God, man, he was just complaining about everything. He would basically, he had an eating disorder, which my fault, right? I didn't ask enough questions at the start. He had an eating disorder. He was just complaining all the time, constantly ridiculous, honestly. And he would just binge, and then he would take it out on me. And all this kind of, and it was like a bloody relationship, mate. It was like having a girlfriend.
Don't say that too loud.
I'm only messing, guys. Don't take offense.
But think about that, most of the time, those no, you're not. I'm joking. So most of the time, the people you take on who are looking to do a competition are probably the people who need the most help with their mental health. Some of them are just doing that competition because they don't know any other way to stay in shape all around. They feel that they have to do competition to get lean, right? So for the most part, some coaches shouldn't be taking these people on because they already have low calories. They're already overdoing cardio. They already have eating disorders, as you mentioned just then. So,
definitely, go on.
As a coach, sometimes we need to be referring these people out to psychologists, not to a fitness coach, right, or a nutrition coach.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about that now. And firstly, I'll just finish about the difference between like someone, for example, who's preparing for a competition, someone who's already in shape and they want to take it to the next level and get on stage, to the average person. Now, I've trained everything from kind of semi-pro athletes to, old age pensioners. And the bottom line is, adherence-wise, behavioral issues, as Andrew brushed over on the last episode, when it comes to getting abs, for example, and getting leaner and getting healthier in general, you have to slowly change behaviors, and that can be quite difficult. So for the average person to say, for example, someone who doesn't like vegetables, as you say, there's a lot of people who don't like vegetables, getting them to eat more vegetables consistently, right? That can take a long time, and it might never happen. It might never happen for a lot of people. So then if it doesn't happen, which does happen a lot of the time, some people just don't adhere to that. And there's nothing you can really do about it. There's only so much you can do for them to actually make these changes. Then you can change another behavior. Let's just say, okay, you're drinking 1 liter of water. Let's bump you up to 1.5 liter and be consistent with that. And when you start slowly changing those behaviors, the average person then gets generally amazing long-term results, right? But, it's kind of 50-50, 50-50. It really depends on the person. But when it comes to prepping someone for a comp, thankfully, a lot of the athletes I've coached, they're very disciplined, very consistent. And I was, after learning from that one guy, they had a healthier relationship with food, didn't have mental issues, and they would just follow it to a T. And if I'm honest, mate, it was kind of easy money.
Yeah, they're the easiest to look after, right? Because you just give them a plan, they don't bother you, they get on with it, and that's it. Whereas, for most people, it's a much longer process. That's why when we're coaching people, we try and tie them in for at least a 3-month period, because we know that it's going to take that time and more for creating those behavioral changes that you just mentioned there, Imran.
Give me an example. There's a guy who listens to this podcast, and I think you're coaching him now online, right?
Who's that? Andy, is it?
No, I don't want to mention his name now. I don't know. He'll be all right. Rocky Kelly. You know that dude?
Yes, Andy. Yeah,
shout out. Oh, it is Andy. Shout out, Andy.
Yeah. He's a big fan of the show, so I'm happy to be coaching him. And it hasn't been too difficult working with Andy. He's been great, actually.
Yeah.
So, he just wanted to learn a lot more about the training side of it. Activity levels, how to dial in his nutrition a little bit. He's always asking questions, and I'm happy to lend him a hand. But he's been a great client. He's been,
awesome. So how's your approach with like getting in, for example? Like, we won't talk too much about, but
for me as a coach, it's not about me dishing out, giving him like a black and white plan. It's for him to try and work things out himself, right, Mark? Because during that process, I want him to learn. I don't want me to go, okay, Andy, these are your macronutrients. This is why you should do this. This is why you should do that. I'm on hand to answer questions that he does have, but I do also want him to think for himself as well. Otherwise, he's not going to learn anything from the process. And when I stop coaching him, he's at a dead stop. Then he's not going to be able to know anything himself. So he's going to be back to square one. My main aim is for him to handle it for himself long into the future, so he doesn't have to rely on me.
Yep. That's it. That's exactly what I was trying to extract out of you then.
Yes,
was it give a man a fish and feed him for a day? Teach him how to fish and feed him for a lifetime, right? That's what it's about. It's about teaching people. And that's what I think the audience need to be aware of is like a good coach is someone who's going to guide you, give you all the correct information. So then that's very valuable nowadays. The information and the correct advice is very valuable because there's a lot of mainly bullshit information out there now online, especially with fitness and nutrition. So it's hard to sift through all of the shit, right? So, but it is down to you to obviously make the changes. And Andrew's approach is exactly my approach, is to teach people the right way to train, get them to focus on the big rocks, as we mentioned, straight away off the bat. You're normally asking them how their sleep is, right? Are you sleeping well? Do you wake up in the nighttime? Do you dream at night? That's a big one for, you don't want to talk too much about their dreams because that can be a bit weird. But,
let's give it with Andy. He's given me great feedback, and it's great as a coach to like get solid feedback from your clients. And some of the biggest things I've heard from him is that he's trying our new program, and he's feeling better. People are giving him compliments, like his posture has improved. So these are some of the things that I like to hear from clients, and that means I'm doing my job correctly. Still a long way to go with him.
Yep.
But it's a good start, man. And let's talk about, like, obviously, how has your training differed this show to previous shows, and where's the paradigm shifted with you with your training?
Yeah. So now I'm. You know what? It's better this time around because last time for the Wolves, I changed my training program and done something different where I think in reality, it's probably splitting hairs, but I do think in reality, if I'd have stuck to what I was doing, training the full body, like I am now, I would have got better results. And so now, the main thing that's changed leading up to this show, right, aside from the training, is the posing. Right now, unfortunately, I was on another podcast, Chris Spearman. For any of the listeners, it's only a few episodes back. Go listen to it because I recorded it and posted it on mine. It's Shred with Science with Chris Spearman, very successful online coach and cover model. And actually, he's a scientist as well. And we were talking about this, and I didn't mention for some reason the main thing I'm changing is the posing. So that is where I came undone last. Although I still got top 10 in the world, right? On the pro stage at the World Championship. So to get top 10 in the world and not get it right is pretty damn good. So I'm still happy with that looking back. But obviously at the time I was pissed because my posing, I didn't get it right. And that makes a massive difference. In fact, it's one of the main things on stage. Next to bringing the condition to the stage, the physique, you've got to present it properly. You've got to present your physique properly to the judges, show off your strongest areas. If you can, hide some of the weaker areas. And that's the way to do it. So this time round, I've hired a better posing coach, and I feel so much more confident. And also, the good thing, and is I haven't competed for over 3 years now, and you really do realize that actually my physique has developed a lot, especially my legs, so I don't have to actually do as much now in my posing. Don't get me wrong, I'm still working hard and flexing the shit out of every muscle, but I don't have to overthink certain angles and stuff now because, for example, my quads are much bigger, which makes my waist look smaller. My shoulders are wider. So I haven't got, because a lot of these guys on the stage, don't forget, their waist will be 4 or 5 inches smaller than mine. So another thing, genetically, my waist isn't built for this kind of sport, right? It's like a 34-inch waist. So even when I come down and get shredded, it'll probably be about 31. But because I've got, I've developed muscle over the years, it gives the illusion that obviously my waist is smaller. So main thing is the pose and hands, but also training with less intensity, as you mentioned before, and more frequently. So it's always the same message. That's what I've done, and that's no bullshit leading up to the show. Less intensity and hitting the body parts more frequently. Even if that... Yeah, one more thing, mate. If I was, like yesterday, for example, I was tired and I just done a really light pump on my legs in the gym using machines. Really light. Done some mobility. And I never would have done that beforehand because I would have been panicking thinking, shit, I'm not doing enough.
You haven't done enough, right?
Yes, exactly.
And even the same with your cardio, right? You've mentioned that you're not doing any planned cardio leading up to the show. You've just been tracking your steps. Now, again, if you had done that years ago, you would have panicked as well, right? You wouldn't even thought about picking your knee up or doing more steps. That wouldn't have been part of the plan, right? It would have been, I'm either going to do some high-intensity intervals or I'm going to step on the cross-trainer and do 30, 40 minutes of work.
Exactly. And all I'm doing is just making sure I hit 15,000 steps, and that's it.
Yeah. And your physique is responding pretty well to obviously more frequency with the training.
Absolutely shredded. From going from 10,000 steps to 5,000 steps. This is what we always talk about, but the listeners need to be aware of the power of these bloody Fitbits, mate. It frustrates me because I get the fact this is the best tool out of everything I use with clients. Most people, they don't want to take 5 minutes out of their day to track food. They just don't want to, right? So with the Fitbit, you put it on your wrist, and you're aware of how many steps you're doing, right? And I went from 10,000 to 15,000, which is probably an extra, 30 minutes of walking a day, and I've got shredded, right? I haven't changed nothing else. So, obviously I brought the calories down slowly leading up to this, but I was eating 4,000 calories, right? So I slowly brought my calories down to 3,400, and then rather than taking the calories down again, I just bumped my steps up. And I have taken the calories down a little bit more now, but the main win for me was the extra 30 minutes of walking a day, mate. And
that's an easier, going for a light walk is much easier than doing 10 sprints on a treadmill or a bike or something like that, especially when you're dieting yourself down to these low figures, right?
100%, mate. Listen, mate, we're going to have to wrap this up soon because I'm running out of time.
Yeah, I got you, mate. We're having a good chat tonight, so I'm enjoying this. But what advice would you give someone who's looking to get into men's physique or fitness modeling?
Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties with the last, say, 3 or 4 minutes of the podcast. But just to answer Andrew's question for the audience, now, if you are considering doing some form of, whether it's bodybuilding or men's physique or bikini, getting on stage, then it isn't for everyone. So what I did say on the original version of the podcast was you need to have a good relationship with food before you consider doing it. And what I mean by that is not eating a great deal of processed foods. Now, even using protein bars and most protein shakes, unless it's organic, whey, grass-fed, and there's just 4 or 5 ingredients in it, which is, quite hard to come by, they're still processed foods. So I was actually pretty much hooked on these things, right? Because I was having at one point 6 scoops of protein a day, and what you're chasing is the flavor. You're not chasing the protein, because if that was the case, you'd have a chicken breast or some chicken thighs, right? Now, they're still very tasty, especially protein bars and stuff like that. So just avoid those kind of foods as much as possible. Still look at those foods as processed foods. And if you are going to prep for a show, prior to actually starting your prep or considering doing it, just make sure that you're eating primarily whole foods most of the time. So you're okay with eating, meat, vegetables, for your carb sources, sweet potatoes, some rice, quinoa, oats or whatever, just whole foods. And that doesn't mean you can't have any treats on prep or if you want to have a cheat meal, although I hate using that term. That's totally fine. But the bottom line is, as I'm talking now, I'm exactly 2 weeks out from my show, and I have not felt the need to have a cheat meal all the way through my prep. And the reason being is because even when I'm not prepping, I don't really get the urge. I do like to eat foods like, which are not very ideal for me, but it's made with whole food ingredients. For example, if I have ice cream, I tend to go to this healthier vegan place. Not that vegan place is necessarily healthy, but I'll go there. There's 4 ingredients in it. There's like dates, cashew butter, 1 or 2 other things. And that's what I'll have as ice cream as a dessert. And I'll probably eat too much of it. I'll have 3 scoops every time. But yeah, for example, I was going to go for a pizza the other day because I felt, I've earned it. But then I thought, I'm not getting any nutrients out of that. So I went to this steakhouse where they do all good quality kind of grass-fed meat. And I had a naked burger, which was lovely. And I had loads of cheese, loads of meats, just veggies. So I had a big feast, but primarily lots of meat and cheese. And then I had some ice cream afterwards. So, you shouldn't really feel the need and urge to have those kind of foods regular if you're prepping. If you do, most of the time what's going to happen then, and this is not just talking about protein bars, this is talking about crappy foods that we feel like we need to have a quote-unquote cheat meal or cheat day with, you're still addicted to those foods. And when you get to, it's going to be much more miserable, firstly, prepping. And secondly, you're going to most likely rebound really bad afterwards, like I did several times, as I talked about earlier in this podcast. So I guess top tips: make sure you've got a good relationship with food. Make sure you've got a good relationship with fitness in general, exercise in your body. Because if you're training primarily to look better, if your main priority right now, anyone listening, is to train to change the way your body looks, and that's number 1 for you before anything else that comes into it. So you're not even considering all the other benefits you get out of it. Like you feel better mentally when you train. You tend to sleep better. All this kind of stuff that happens. And then you do look good as a side effect. But if you're not considering any of those important health markers, which are really important for us as humans, exercise is something which, if you ask me, is an essential part of most people's, of everyone's lifestyle. If you're not looking at those important markers and you're just focusing on how you look, that's not a good state of mind to go into a show with. So all that's going to do then is cementing, if you've got, if you're training because of any insecurities, like Andrew and I were in the past, and like a lot of people are, a lot of people are insecure about certain ways, certain parts of their body, and they want to improve that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's what your tunnel vision is, then let me tell you, it's only going to get worse after you've done a show, because you're being critiqued against other people in great shape. And you're going to be, even now, I'm looking in the mirror. My girlfriend picked up on this yesterday. She's like, you're so obsessive. I'm looking in the mirror. I get up for a pee early hours in the morning. I'm looking at my abs, going back to my old ways. But it is that, maybe that's not necessary, but most of it is necessary. You have to have an obsession when you're getting on stage and you're going to get up and, hopefully win, right? You want to get up there and compete with people who have, most people have put the work in and they're not playing games. So you have to be a bit obsessive to get up there. And that's that really. So just don't even consider doing a show. And one other thing I'd like to mention as well is building your metabolism up. If you're going into a show and you're having to, for a woman, you're having to cut and get lean on, say, anything lower than, I would say, ideally, anything lower than about 1,600 calories, right? If you're having to go lower than that to get lean for a prolonged period, that's just not ideal. You haven't built your metabolism up. you might want to improve your daily movement, increase your daily movement if that's your case. If you're having to go that low on calories for a prolonged period leading up to a show, because that is going to screw with you mentally for most people. You can't really have a life really eating anything less than that. So the people I prep for shows, women, for example, I like to get their maintenance calories up to at least 2,000 calories, before they consider doing a show. And that involves spending a few years building muscle, but also integrating more daily activity into your lifestyle, more movement, more walking. So that way then, your maintenance calories are higher and you can get leaner much easier. And for guys, if you're having to go into a show on anything less than 2,500 calories as your maintenance, again, it's going to be very tough. So it's the same thing really. So build your metabolism up, build a relationship with food, get a good relationship with yourself and with exercise. You shouldn't be training in the gym to punish yourself because you've overate on the weekend. You should be training because you love your body, as cheesy as that sounds, right? And I guess that's kind of it, really. I'm sure there's one or two other things I can think of, but they're kind of the main points. And with that, if you could go follow Andrew and I on Instagram, I am at Martin Silva Fitness. Andrew is at Mr. Bond Fitness. And I mentioned this in the last podcast, but please feel free to drop me a direct message, if you listen to this podcast, because it's hard to pinpoint exactly who listens. So feel free to reach out and say, hey, I listened to your podcast, and give me your feedback. That would be great. Just send me a direct message on Instagram is easier. And I guess that's a wrap. Thank you for tuning in, folks, and we'll see you next time.